was doing the gallery at Cal State Northridge, and I realized very soon that longevity in that position would be short if I did anything interesting in the gallery because of the very conservative faculty. And as soon as there was something that even a little bit challenged their own work or their own ideas, they got upset. So I thought I had to do things outside, and I applied and got a job at the Brand Library in Glendale, and with the idea that if I did one exhibition and got fired, then I got to do one exhibition. And so that actually lasted almost 3 years. And I was very, very proud that when I started the job, it was kind of a background for a cocktail party once a month for the local citizens. And when I left, none of the local citizens came to the openings, but it was filled with artists from Pasadena and Venice. And the shows were getting reviewed in Art Forum and Art in America, so they couldn't fire me because it was a civil service position. What they did was they eliminated my job. And that cut me loose, and I thought, well, maybe I ought to start something, you know, and I thought about doing a little nonprofit space, renting a storefront in Culver City, which had no galleries then. And I went around and I talked to Jean Milan and to Paul Brock and started making lists of people that would be interested. And just as I was doing that, the Pasadena Museum of Modern Art went belly up. And so all of the people that had been involved there or were disenfranchised from the county museum, they were free. And there was an amazing collection of people, powerful collectors and artists that were interested in something happening. So, and I didn't have any idea what an alternative space was at all. And I think the first person that mentioned it to me, or anything going on in New York, was Gary Lloyd. And he mentioned the clock tower and artist space. So I started doing some research and doing things, and put together a program that I thought was artist-oriented. And the county museum was very much a foil for whatever we did, because let's say, I think this came from Nicholas Wilder. He was talking about the way exhibitions were organized, and he said, well, the curators come and they pick out the work, and then it gets sent over to the museum and it's installed, and then the artist gets an invitation. Otherwise they don't have anything to do with the exhibition. And I thought, oh, well, that's just exactly the opposite of what I want to do, because I like working with artists and making things happen. So, and then I started calling the county museum to find out about how they operated, and I thought, well, maybe I could go sit in on one of their board meetings. And they said, oh no, our board meetings are completely closed to the public. And really, so, and then I started asking about projects there, like do they ever have a happening or artist performance? No, they couldn't do that because the board has to have prior approval of anything that went on at the museum. And so that, I thought, well, if the artist is in control of the space, so what LAICA was trying to do was to create a public space that was like the artist studio, and so that they would have carte blanche and could do anything within financial reason space to do their work. And some of the early exhibitions were just amazing like that. There was one show that Peter Lodato organized, George Herm's Lloyd Hamrill and Bruce Nauman. And Bruce Nauman was in the space. He actually built the walls for his work. And, you know, it was very much a cooperative venture.
What was the financial structure?
Well, it was, let's say, by the seat of our pants.
I mean, there weren't a grant. Was there a grant structure?
No. Yeah, and initially I thought it was a really bad idea to take government money because of control. And that's mainly because of the way the city of Los Angeles controlled art programs and funding. And I hadn't thought about the National Endowment at all. When organizing it, I went around and had meetings with different groups of artists. And the artist community was fragmented just the way it is now. So I had a meeting in Pasadena, I had a meeting in kind of down in the Crenshaw district, and a meeting in Venice, and a meeting downtown. And each constituency had their own set of needs. So what I put together for the program was an amalgam of that. And the meeting in Venice was, of course, with all of the Venice good old boys group, who had galleries and were selling the work regularly and stuff like that. And Billy L. Bankston said, we don't need another gallery. You know, everybody can see our work, but we need a magazine. Art Forum had left town, and so LA didn't have a magazine. So first thing I put down, we should do a magazine. And that was completely naive and foolish, but that's the way I did it. And it was kind of like the way I took the job at the Brand Library. If we did one issue of the magazine and it folded, then we did one issue. Great. And what happened was we had a little fundraising event out in the San Fernando Valley that Johnny Gordon and her friend Faith Lamb put on, and it was kind of like a raffle. I wish I had some of the work from that raffle, but you know, now very significant artists, and I think we raised $2,500, and so we had enough money to do the first issue of the magazine. And Fidel Daniele, who was teaching at Valley College then, he was a contemporary at UCLA. He had done some writing for Art Forum, and so I called Fidel and I said, hey, I want to do a magazine. So I was living in Los Feliz there in an apartment, and we got together, and I put on the table, there was Avalanche and Art Right and Interfunctionen and you know, all the magazines that I could collect. And we just, between the two of us, we decided what the journal should be. And I went out and I thought it should be done on newsprint. But we went to get estimates for the newsprint, and it was too expensive to do it on newsprint. But at UCLA, I had been the yearbook editor. I wanted to do the graphic design on the yearbook, so I applied to be the editor, and then I didn't have to answer to anybody, I could just do it. And so we went to the yearbook printer, and they printed it for us in the off season, and so it was very slick and kind of nice looking. The typeset was typeset on a Selectric typewriter. That's the location of LAICA, and not having much luck, and And then I was driving through Century City and I saw the ABC Entertainment Center, and at that time they were building those 2 triangular towers. And so I called ABC and I said, told them what I wanted to do, and they said, yeah, that they would rent it to us for industrial rates. And about that time, Marshall Westman heard what I was doing and invited me over to her house. And so I never, let's see, I was familiar with the collection of Gifford and Joanne Phillips, but Marcia's collection was, in their way, very, very special. And even though they didn't have any demon horns. And so here I was astonished, and Marcia said, well, you shouldn't have to pay rent there. They're dying. She had a space and an exhibition that was going to open in Beverly Hills, and they were at dinner before the opening, and Frank Sinatra was in the neighboring table and being really obnoxious, and Marcia's husband Fred asked him to be quiet, and he was even louder, and so he asked him again and really complained, and Frank clubbed him over the head with a champagne bottle and crushed his skull. So I don't know if that paid for Mid-Atlantic Toyota, but I'm sure the settlement was very severe, and so this kind of very early space. So she got on the phone and called her brother's office and said, "Who's the president of ABC?" And that's Leonard Goldson. She called his office and said, "Hi, I'm Marcia Wiseman, I'm Lawrence Simon's sister. This is a big opportunity for you, and do you have lunch free on Monday?" And she flew to New York and met with Leonard Goldson, cemented this rent-free space for us. So not only did Marcia kind of pave the way for MoCA, but she was very instrumental in making LAICA happen. And everybody kept asking, here we've done 2 issues of the magazine, and everybody says, well, when's LAICA going to open? And I said, well, we're already doing things. And they said, no, when are you going to have an exhibition? Fidel Daniele, that was doing the magazine, he also curated the first exhibition. And that was one of the ideas that I had, was that I wouldn't be responsible for all of the shows or stuff like that guest curators would do most of the exhibitions. And what actually happened was there was a backlog of good ideas that was sitting in LA, that didn't have an outlet. The Pasadena Museum of Modern Art wasn't going to invite people in to do a collage and assemblage show like Hal Lexman did, or to invite Walter Hobbs back to do a show about Walter Hobbs. So we just started doing things. And initially, we focused on just Los Angeles things. And then pretty soon, we got a proposal for doing a show of artists from San Francisco. So that seemed logical. And a number of people, when I was organizing the thing, they had mentioned the problem of provinciality and that LA needed things from the outside. I think one of the best shows we ever did was an exhibition that Barry LeVay did. And it was completely uncompromising. He organized walls and arcs in the space, and there were 3 rooms. We in order to visualize the whole arrangement, you had to imagine yourself up in the sky about 90 feet with X-ray vision looking through into the building. And actually, after he did that exhibition, or similar ones, he realized that he had to kind of pull back because he was outstripping the ability of people to actually perceive what he was doing. And I think that was completely the idea of what we wanted to do. Towards the middle of my tenure, I did a show with Michelangelo Pistoletto, and that was partially out of my own inquisitiveness. When I was at UCLA, I was a designer and read Domus, and Pierre Rostani wrote all of these articles about Michelangelo Pistoletto, and I thought, God, here's an opportunity to do an exhibition with him. And so he did an exhibition of these minus objects that related to fluxus and Arte Povera. And now that he is doing some major exhibitions towards the ends of his career, that exhibition is immensely significant. And I think, like in terms of the way it was received locally was, well, why do we need that? The pictures exhibition happened at the same time as the Alternative Space Conference. So I think everybody was misdirected towards the conference because there was controversy amongst the artist community about the conference. Like David Sally, another CalArts graduate, let's see, he did an installation at Claire Copley Gallery. Hey, how would you like to come back to Los Angeles and do another installation? Something related to your painting, but very much an installation and not a saleable object. And fine. Wouldn't have anything to do with it. That was, I guess, me trying to provoke activity. And I did that continually. The other thing that was important, I think, was artists feeding things to artists and other curators. David Ross, who was the video curator at the Long Beach Museum, we had just opened the first show, and he called me and he said, "The Kipper Kids are in town." And I said, "Well, who are the Kipper Kids?" And he said, "Well, they're just phenomenal people." And he said, you have to have a performance. So what I did is I de-installed the exhibition so they could do their performance, which was very closely tied to CalArts because they had violated a student performance in CalArts, and so the students got together and then violated the Kipper Kids performance, and which was a nice about face. But if it wasn't for David Ross, that wouldn't have happened. And then in our first NEA grant application, it went to the panel, and Alana Heiss from the Clock Tower was on the panel, and she had done some traveling and seen the Kipper Kids. And she said, "I don't know this Bob Smith, and I don't know what this LAICA is, but if they did the Kipper Kids, they'll be okay." So we got our first grant. Same thing with Hermann Nitsch. Al Capro, so he called me and said, "Hermann's in Vancouver. You have to get him down to do an action in LA." And so we did. Well, there was Kim Jones. And he did, let's see, two very significant performances at LAICA. And when he left for New York, he gave me a little drawing. And he said to Bob Smith, because he liked sex and violence. So there may be my own interest in that edge, and certainly the Nitsch performance or action was important. Paul McCarthy and Mike Kelly were members of the band, and they didn't know each other then. And I remember 3 months after doing the action, we were driving down with the preparator, David Sable. We were driving down to Santa Ana on 5, and there are all of those billboards, and every billboard we passed related to Hermann Nitsch.
In what way?
It's because the action had so ingrained itself in our minds that we could not see something without thinking about him or what went on. And I've always thought that I would like to do another one, but do it in City Hall. It's interesting. There was another performance that was extreme, and that was COUM, Kosi Tutti and Genesis P. Orridge, who later became Throbbing Gristle, the punk rock band. And I remember John Baldessari walked out at sort of halftime, and he said, "That's not art. It's disgusting." In the beginning, the committee meetings were very heated things, and a lot of people came. And then as soon as the space opened, we had an exhibition, then nobody came. Kept inviting people to come. No interest. And I thought that the choice of that very conservative exhibition was perfect, because it kind of laid us down as, not just one kind of organization, that there was going to be this wide variety. And I think that was one of the problems, was there wasn't any consistency, so people couldn't put their finger on it, and we would do one show that they would love, and then 3 shows that they would really hate in X individual. If you're trying to design an organization that you want to be popular and really successful, but museums can't afford to do that. Built into LAICA's ideas was that the artists were paid a fee for the public loan of their work. And a lot of people thought that was superfluous because they're getting exposure. But nevertheless, it was a principle. And also for performance, that what was significant was after we had the first 5 or 6 performances, they were paid a fee, and I'm not sure how the gate was split, but I looked at it and I thought, well, we shouldn't be making money off of the artist's work. So that from then on, artists that did performance, they got 100% of the gate plus a fee. Joan Jonas did 2 very major performances, one early on and one later. And in the later one, it was during the CETA years, the end of the Carter administration and before Reagan. And so we had a staff. CETA was the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, which was just as we are in an era of high unemployment now. And on the radio today, I heard some talk of maybe we needed a WPA type program. And that's exactly what it was. It was a jobs training program. And in the city of Los Angeles, the city councilman, Joel Wax, was instrumental in seeing that a portion of the CETA funds were funneled to arts organizations. And we were able to plug into that rather well. The first year, we had an artist in residence program where artists did lectures and presentations at LAICA. And then the second year we did an art in public places program. Many of them are now rather significant.
And they were paid a wage for...
Yes, they were paid a living wage in order to do their work. I remember there was a little controversy with the city monitor. The photographer, Anthony Hernandez, was talking about what he did during the day. He had a schedule where he got up and either worked in the studio or went out and took photographs. And then he had lunch, and then he took a nap, and then he read art magazines for the rest of the afternoon. And the city monitor said, no, you can't do that. We can't pay you to read magazines. You know, that's part of my job. Yeah. And it's interesting because at the county museum, let's say, only a couple of times did I meet with Maurice Tuckman at the county museum, but at one of the times when I went into his office, it was during his magazine reading time. The county museum wasn't doing anything, and so we had the whole field to ourselves. There was I don't think there was any competition. Mm-hmm. And as far as the county museum goes, Rusty Powell invited me out to lunch and wanted to know what we were doing. But I think for the rest of the staff, we were pretty much an annoyance. Mm-hmm. Early 80s, I took a fundraising class, and where they told you how to raise money. And I'd seen museum directors raising money. So I kind of had a clue, but the tactic was to use your information to become friends with the person you want to get money from. And then you ask for a large amount of money, and if you don't get the money, then you end the friendship. And so there was an exercise at this class where we had to do this. And the person next to me was very astute, so I said, I gave her my pitch, and I said, we need $20,000, because that was double whatever I'd ever gotten before. And she said no, and I almost threw up. Chris D'Arcangelo did a work for the journal. Claire Copley was the guest editor of the journal, and in it there was a left-hand page, had text on it, and it explained that the right-hand page is blank, and it invited the people reading the journal to cut out the blank page, put anything on it they wanted, and then install it in a LAICA space. And so Of course, the journal committee had no problem with this, but the exhibition committee was really upset because they had visions of people, hundreds of people coming in and pasting the journal page on paintings or somebody else's work. And but it didn't happen. And I said, look, the journal's an independent body, and they have every right to do that. You know, and then you can respond. The exhibition part can respond. In fact, I got invited to a couple of conferences of museum directors, and I was talking one time at lunch with Richard Oldenburg, who's the director of the Modern, and I said that I thought it was really strange that they didn't publish a magazine, because it would be a huge financial success. And he said that at one time they had talked about it, but they couldn't get the staff to go along, that there might be an editorial position in the magazine that conflicted with the curatorial ideas that were present in the museum. So it never happened. Can you imagine all of the great advertising they would sell? The conference, it was called the New Art Space, which was a phrase that never caught on. I think in 1977, the directors of about 8 alternative spaces were invited to Washington, D.C. to talk about what they were doing, their relationship to the NEA. And at that meeting, having a conference was discussed. And that was right at the beginning of the CEDAR program. And so we had a staff that I thought was huge. I think we had 8 people.
It's huge.
Well, for the first 3 years, it was myself and one other person. So, she did all of the typing and managed the gallery and stuff like that. And I did the installations and took out the trash and stuff like that. So it seemed like it was huge. So I thought, well, why don't we do the conference? If we don't do it, then somebody else is going to do it. And doing the first one should be a lot of fun. And so we started planning, and the NEA was supportive of the idea. And initially, it kind of got off track because I asked Alana Heiss who should be on panels, and the people she recommended were, I think, too much in the museum world. And so I kind of rethought it. Sort of had a national group of people that exchanged information, and it was very difficult because there was no internet. And we didn't have a lot of money for phone bills and stuff.
So it was letters?
Yes, we actually wrote letters and outlined things, and people made suggestions. And then I wrote up an application to the visual arts program at the NEA, and I think I asked for $30,000, and they were astonished that it was so little. It was very, very small. I think I could have asked for $100,000, and they would have funded it. But so there were about 350 people at the conference from all over the U.S. and Canada, and the panels were really, I think, real meaty. One of the interesting things about the conference is every panel discussion had a different arrangement of chairs. which no one, I think Robert Irwin is the only person who noticed. And it was his idea because he had done the same thing at Caltech. But then everybody thought there should be a national organization, but nobody kind of jumped up and said, let's do it. And then there was a second conference in New Orleans, and it didn't happen again. And then finally Al Nadal, who was then running Washington Project for the Arts, he had the third conference, and he made the National Association happen. It was the National Association of Artists Organizations. I think it was, I'm not sure exactly why it was controversial, but at the main banquet there was an artist protest, and they all came and they said to all of these people, most of whom were artists, that were taking their own time to create alternative spaces. In essence, they said, you shouldn't be here, there should just be artists. Well, Gary Lloyd was one of the organizers, and one of the LAICA staff members, Morgan Fisher, filmmaker, he was one of the organizers, and we had a little problem with Morgan because he wanted to organize the protest on his work time. And I said, no, you can't do that. LAICA had become an institution, but from the very first opening, we were an institution. Southern California Painters was extremely well attended. It was like packed, and we had a cash bar set up and sold little tickets for people to get drinks. And I remember at the opening, there were, a lot of the tickets got dropped on the floor and stuff like that. And people were down on their hands and knees getting drink tickets off of the floor. And that really upset me, that was my baptism, that the whole sacred idea of this, creating this space, and this kind of utopian, I think, in my mind. There were some alternative spaces that I was interested in kind of joining as a network in Southern California so that we could share things. And they saw that as, maybe we're trying to take over the small spaces. And this, let's see, in the 80s, we hired a curator from a space in San Diego. The space is called Installation. And Newton Harrison, he thought we were trying to take over the installation space. But we actually were trying to help them, and we did a lot of things. And eventually, he came around and he said, oh, I didn't understand what was going on at first, but now it seems to be okay. But I think it's, let's see, I think it was a lack of maturity in the community. I think, like if LAICA had happened in Manhattan, it would have just been another one of several alternative spaces. MoCA kind of answered the need for a larger institution. And because it had such large financial goals, it was beyond the imagination of most of the people in the arts community. When LAICA was in the planning stages, it was called a museum, but Joanne Phillips said no. You know, that's wrong, it should be an ICA. And so that's how the name came about. There was a meeting of Peter Plegans and myself and Bill and Mary Norris. Bill Norris is a federal judge, and they proposed that LAICA be a museum downtown. And so I gave them a list of candidates for board members and a copy of our articles of incorporation, and then we never heard from them. And then the next thing I know, Marcia Wiseman's inviting everybody to her house to announce MOCA. Given my own management style and lack of relish for fundraising, LAICA could have never been MOCA. So it just, you know, there was a time when there was an opening where there wasn't much happening, and we tried to do a lot. And I think that's what's kind of neat about the timeline. I'm happy doing Greyhounds. It's interesting that it is a good contrast to running LAICA, because with everything I did with LAICA, it had controversy. No matter what it was, there was somebody who would disagree with it. When you rescue greyhounds, you know, it's very obvious what the activity is,